So my name is Jace Clayton, and just briefly, I'm going to talk about all the good things: copyright, travel, and God. And it's funny. I was reflecting on this conference, and I realized, as a DJ, I always sort of ignored copyright, right? And the reason for that was because copyright ignored me, which is to say, this idea of the DJ mix, it's at the very core of it. You're taking all these different works by other people, and you're blending them together. You're layering them on top of each other. You're mixing them up. You're changing the speed. You're creating your own narrative out of other people's work. And that work of the DJ, it's obsessed me. I love it. I still love it to that day. And copyright sort of prevents, it's a legal framework that prevents people from seeing or valuing that. And so I ignored copyright, and copyright ignored me in the first many years of my career as a DJ. And at one point, the man who represents Nina Simone's copyright got in touch. I'd used a little bit of plain gold ring in a mix, and so he wrote myself and the label that put out this sort of bootleg, quote-unquote bootleg mix. And the label owner just wrote back this high-powered lawyer explaining the number of copies we'd sold, explaining that it was in the context of this very dense mix that had 50 different music tracks on it, often several playing at the same time. And the lawyer didn't even bother to write back to us. It wasn't worth his interest to go after it. Which points to the way in which many of these DJ cultures, in terms of who can copy, what can be copied, what can be permitted, they're often quite self-policing in that, and even interfacing with a legal framework like we did. But this was the first stage of my existence as a DJ. I was putting up mixes as cassette mixtapes, and then CDs and MP3s, and at each stage of that, I always felt like I was reaching the people I needed to reach. But then in the past maybe 4 or 5 years, I've actually been seeing how my music, the bulk of my recorded music as a DJ, it's actually traveling less and less. And the reason for that is because we're entering this strange moment where sort of the musical archives, where people go to listen to music, it's moving away from having a file on your own computer or having a physical object in your collection, and it's moving towards something being available only as a digital stream. And so services like Spotify or YouTube, they have these sort of copyright sniffing algorithms built into it. So if you try and upload a mix of mine to YouTube, you'll see the image, but the sound will be muted because there's all these copyright violations built into it. So whereas before, I was like, yeah, people want to hear DJ Rupture music, they can do that. And now it's just becoming much and much more difficult. And the strange thing about the sort of the automatic algorithmic takedown is there's no longer that kind of discussion. The email that we sent to Nina Simone's lawyers, that was a bit of a conversation. And those days are over. And of course, it's troubling to me because I'm watching as my art slowly exits the historical record. But it's even more troubling when I think about how this overall historical record, the container for all this music we listen to and love, it's increasingly a very commercial, a very corporate container. And we're seeing this situation where copyright pretty much exists to sort of regulate the passage into those very specific sites with very specific rules. And so there's even been instances where, for example, I've posted music of my own, a remix that I've done for a band on SoundCloud, and had it been rejected automatically by their algorithms. So I'm thinking we're in this moment where it feels like these sort of algorithms that let one listen or not listen, they feel very, it feels like we can't address them. Who can talk to Google? Who can complain about Facebook's algorithm? So there's something quite godlike about this situation. There's something quite theocratic. We're making the appeals. Can you please create a library instead of this sort of strange corporate container? And it rarely works. And so thinking about that, sort of, YouTube algorithms as this new God force in our life that's regulating access to culture, that's sort of shaping our desires, that's unseen and yet so present. I started thinking about another form of God as it relates to music and copying, and that's Quranic recitation. And so, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's been practiced all over the Muslim world, for the last 1,400 years. It's when reciters, specially trained vocalists, will sing verses or surahs from the Quran, often in a mosque and then now on all sorts of different channels. And the main style for Quranic recitation is called mujawad. And it's kind of amazing. And so the core of the style, it's saying you're reciting holy words, but you're doing it using all of these musical tools. You're using different scales, you're using timing, emotion, affect. And the whole point is to make the meaning of that Quran really hit the audience in the room with you right there and in that moment. And so because of it, there have been created all these rules. And it's kind of stunning. So the mujawad style, it only exists for an audience, which is to say, when you rehearse it on your own in private, you can't recite the Quran. You have to recite some secular text, like a pop song, anything, epic poem, you can't use the Quran. But when you perform it before an audience, you of course must recite the Quran, but all the things you're doing with your voice, all the different musical melodies and notes you're hitting, they must always be improvised. And it's been going on this way for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's this really incredible tradition where you have this emphasis on, the ideas that the Quran text is holy, so that does not change. But everything else must change. And so you have these reciters who exist in this really kind of charged aesthetic tension between the fixed words of the text and this command, literally a religious command to be free in how you vocalize. And I'm going to play you a clip. This is one of the most influential and sort of famous Quranic reciters, Sheikh Mustafa Ismail in Cairo in the 1950s. And this is a YouTube, I'll talk about it a bit afterwards, but you'll hear him singing the same section of the Quran in 3 very different ways. Just to give you an example of what this sounds like. So those were recorded in a mosque, and you hear the crowd sort of going wild and yelling their appreciation in certain moments. And in this tradition of mujawad Quranic recitation, there's this belief that every reciter will learn from great listeners. And so the idea is that there'll be certain key listeners in the audience who, when the person reciting does something particularly ingenious or evocative, they'll shout and cheer them on. And that sort of feedback loop between audience and reciter in service of this holy text makes the whole situation stronger and more powerful. But the skilled listeners are very much a part of what makes someone like Sheikh Mustafa Ismail great. And in a sense, that's something that the culture of DJ music and the culture of Quranic recitation have very much in common. There's this sense that all the meaning being created in sound, all of that power, it doesn't come from a single individual, writing notes or making the composition. It's a very complex and ever-changing relationship between performer, between audience, and between the text. In this case, of course, it's a holy text. The text does not change. It's written. They've been performing those exact same words for endless years. In the case with DJ culture, it's the fixed texts of the vinyl record, the fixed texts of the bits in a CD that are being shifted around and must be brought to life with each performance. But I wanted to play this YouTube clip because this, to me, brings home a key point and think about how copyright attenuates musical travel, which is to say, this, Ismail, he got his start singing in mosques. And because he quickly became famous, he then was doing national radio broadcasts. And he never liked singing on the radio. For him, it was alienating and strange, precisely because he didn't have those skilled listeners there bringing him on. But with the radio, he became even more popular. And so this whole culture of people who would do home tapings of his recitations emerged. And so even nowadays in Cairo, there's a scene of collectors, these mostly guys, unsurprisingly, who will have thousands of hours of this one particular man singing. And then as that culture sort of hit the internet, hit the YouTube years in 2005, those various collectors started upping bits of their Sheikh Mustafa Ismail recordings. And then people went through and started making supercuts, like the one we just saw, where they would go through, find every time Ismail recites a specific verse from the Quran and splice together each of his versions singing it. So you can find clips up to an hour long where it's him just going through the same words over and over again, but ever changing. And so that to me brings home what all these different media shifts required to sustain a sound, sustain a musical practice, sustain a spiritual practice across time. It's not some sort of techno solution that's something you can put in a code, you sign a contract and it's done, boom, no. It's saying that, wow, in order for this man's voice to still be circulating 50 years later, it's a very almost Baroque system. It began in the mosque, it went to the state-owned radio platforms, then went out to the home tapers, and then ended up in the hands of the sort of messy internet creation. And that is how people like me can now find the works of Sheikh Mustafa Ismail. And so I'm so dismayed when I think of my path as a DJ nowadays, and how, as I said before, my recorded works as DJ Rupture are slowly exiting the historical record, because we're in this moment where the possible container is quite small. And so even though I've personally done so many works across vinyl, cassette, CD, MP3, those sources are becoming fewer and fewer and more difficult to access. So I think with that, I'm going to sit down and let the next speaker sort of continue this flow of conversation.
Hello, my name is Geraldine, and I am here in 100 Years of Copyright. I don't know, I don't think it's weird, but I have no interest in copyright at all. I don't think it's a relevant form of organization of rights. I don't respect it, of course, neither. Like I give no credit to copyright, which I think is something that it's interesting that, or necessary, that when we talk about copyright, we realize that we all address that copyright is not only a legal object. There is no such thing as just one thing that is legal. It's also social, it's also economic, it's also political. So in a way, I guess I am interested in all the sides of copyright that has nothing to do with their legal, aspect, and mostly piracy. Like, I guess I got invited here to do an installation that you can see downstairs, because I am more interested in all the things that are open and all the possibilities and all the stories and all the relations that happen because of the failure of copyright, which is piracy, and which is a great failure. I mean, I'm not saying that copyright should be a successful model. I think copyright can succeed, and that's why, enforcing private property, it's like a endless project. You will never be able to control private property completely. It's like an infinite kind of godly, kind of like a project to think you could control property at all levels. So to say that, I was thinking a little bit how I could talk in the context of this panel that is called Travels, Copy Cultures and Music Travels in the Global Mediascape or something like that. And I was just thinking a lot, and which is also related with the narrative of the installation I did, is like, in fact, I was trying to make with that installation, create this image of the pirate, but not in this kind of super basic image of the patches and the skull and, this kind of kindergarten YouTube copyright infringement image that is out there. But more in the sense that the pirate has been always this image of the enemy. It's like this very special kind of enemy that you cannot put them in jail right away, but he's doing something in between the legal and the illegal, the public and the private, and that it's not necessarily, it cannot be pinned down exactly what crime the pirate is doing, So I'm very interested in this kind of non-stable kind of image of the crime, which makes law very difficult to enforce because, for enforce law or like apply certain penalty, you need to say exactly what people did against certain law. And with internet and copy culture in general, sometimes you cannot really, or not sometimes, you can't really make the division where the copy ends and the infringement starts, or where when you are streaming, you are copying some information still in your browser in order to stream. So I'm very interested in how the image of the pirate, the concept of the pirate, complicates a lot of like our relations as a society, which I think is something productive. I don't think it's like, it is complex, but I don't think it's negative at all. I don't see it as negative, especially because I think copyright issues are always kind of understand from this legal standing of property, like reproduction rights, and this way that it's understood by the RIA, or like this kind of collection agencies, that is just this part of the world that understands property in that way, while like a bunch other part of the world and like people, we understand it in another way. So I'm just interested how these collection agencies, for instance, understand everything in terms of money and finitude, while other people is talking about, or like the rest, we talk about more property and, all these more specific kind of practices that they try to protect. And when you talk about copyright, it's also abstract, even though it's certain very specific things are involved, like recording, composing, reproduction, all these kind of super important things for, the practice of copy culture, I guess, that in the run of the last century, I guess, and how we move more into this kind of digitized context, we stopped talking about those things. We stopped talking about like, okay, what we're actually performing what we're actually reproducing, what we're actually composing. Are we composing? Are we recomposing and stuff? I think all these kind of things that for me were very interesting before, to understand all these practices that makes a copy, or all the connection to actuality that implies to copy things, got watered down a lot by, just this streaming and just even copying. You don't copy anymore. We lost kind of the practice of copying. So I think in the context of the title of this talk, I'm just very interested in the same way that I'm not interested in copyright. I think I'm very interested in addressing that copy culture today. The only thing that has to do with copyright is that it's being, copyright was successful in diminish all the possibilities of copy culture. And copy culture as a cultural practice in which we can, a copy culture as a practice where desires of different people from different parts of the world and all the promises that economic system give about access to media and all the threats that legal frameworks bring in are in a mix that create actually a super interesting cultural context. I think copyright has been very successful in flatten out all these nuances and practices that manifest in different ways beyond, the US or the samples of very famous hip hop artists and, or these disproportionate attentions that always we give to legal cases, to the Pirate Bay or Napster, that kind of stuff, that it was, while there has been other super not interesting enough the word, but kind of sad cases about copyright infringement in Latin America, like Horacio Potel, that he was prosecuted, for instance, for post all the translated works of Derrida and Nietzsche on a website. So it's been always very, very concentrated in a certain understanding of property. And this work I did in downstairs that you can just see, it was inspired by this idea that Ravi Sundaram has about pirate modernity, in which he explains that the thing is piracy doesn't really fit these dialectics of property and wealth we usually have. He said that piracy just breaks through and it just decomposes in many fragments of different things, desires, threats, promises, the way he described it. And all of this creates the obvious consequence of property or copyright, which is its pirate double. So there is a question of multiplicity that it's very important that I think also we don't discuss, and I think it's very interesting in the context of what Jace said, that it's more about how the text changes every time it is seen. I think one of the things that for me were very interesting about copy culture until let's say 10 years ago was all this multiplicity, that it was a thing to multiply things was a cool idea. And now with the streaming, that possibility is being completely flat out. Other thing, for instance, with all these kind of ideas about the blockchain kind of tracking everything that you do and stuff, I think multiplicity, it's also it's been attacked again by trying to put in a blockchain all these possibilities, so we will be able to go and see who did what and that, but not in a transformative way, but just more in this bureaucratic, accountable, accounting book way to go back and say, oh, they did that. So I think those are things that copy culture has lost power a lot. I don't think copy culture, I think it was a cool thing. It was when your mixes were out, when we were kind of very hopeful about all these multiplicities we were being part of. And now in just a few years into the 21st century, I think not even pirates are cool anymore. Pirates are just these weird dudes, hacking stuff, super boring, pirate parties that has no credibilities. So even the image of the pirate, it's been diminished by copyright. That is like a non-relevant thing for creativity, from my perspective, or like for production. You don't need copyright to produce, We need all money, not only artists. We all need money to do the things we want, but also to survive at the everyday level, and do what we want. But it's not that only artists need to be especially, I don't think that artists should have special remunerations for certain things. We all need to be paid for what we do, that's like a different kind of approach. So with copyright, it's just this constant, devolution into feudalism, to make these very strong islands of property. And even though that, I guess, copyright has been, it's not 100 years old since it started, but even if it has just a few centuries that started like trying to protect more things that it needs to, it just feels like a millennia, When I think of copyright, I think like in the Bible, or like, that is just this inevitable, super like long property model, because it's so, it's so controlling, so strong, its hold, that it's just against any possibility, So this work was a little bit to map this kind of idea that piracy is like a desire, a threat, or a promise, depending where you stand in the world. So if you are in the US, probably you would see a lot of this RIA and IFPI and enforcement and, confiscating of material and kind of stuff. But if you are a little bit more, in the South kind of the world, it would be more about selling pirate copies and selling cool bootlegs and making some money out of it. Even, I'm not talking about the legal or illegal part, but it's just a promise that through technology and through this kind of material, you can either distribute your music or either feed your family. And in the top of the installation, I talk more about desires, which is a little bit more my personal desires. It's like relation I have with piracy, it's been mostly about, music I like, friends I have made, things I have learned. And copyright has nothing to do with that, with life, with this media, like with this life aspect of media. So I use this form of the pyramid because that's kind of the image that this idea of Ravi Sundaram creates, but also because, I don't know if you know about Copy Me, but it was just this concept about just copy things. They use as a symbol a pyramid, which is very also godly-like kind of symbol, omnipresent kind of thing. So I wanted just to create like this image of like a symbol that all these threads, all these riff in between, that there might be a dialectical relation between information and commerce, and one between culture and commerce, and one between your personal story and information. When they all get together, they are something else that has nothing to do with copyright, but more with just, I guess, media and life and, just like living, which music for me embodies all of that. So I guess that's why it's relevant to music. And of course, this image, or like this format of having the CDs in the floor and stuff, it's just the way CDs are sold, in Mexico and in other places. So, and I really like it, that you just really show and, offer what you have. So it's like a offer, like a symbol about what everyone has to offer, depending where they stand in the world, kind of thing. So I guess that's it for now. You can see the installation after the talk.
Good evening. Once again, for those who were here yesterday. After listening to Geraldine and Jace, I feel like the bad cop. I mean, basically, you're looking at copyright and thinking, I've been working on this for the last 20 years, and then it's all just going up in smoke. But basically, what I'll be looking at today is, my topic is a bit controversial. Can we stop the music? And basically, I was looking at it in the context of, we're looking at music, issues of how we access music, issues of piracy, what informs how we decide how we're going to access this particular music. And for those of you who are here for the keynote address on Friday with Aram, there are certain things that we are looking at, and I was thinking there are very specific issues that we need to look into. And one of them probably is the issue of what determines the way we access and distribute music. And I think Geraldine, from her perspective, she sees that this is something that we need to access, isn't it? It's something that all of us should be able to access, and we shouldn't put roadblocks in terms of whom you're dealing with. Now, when you're talking about societal attitudes, and I think this determines quite a bit of how we think we should consume or distribute this particular music. And more often than not, from the part of the world where I come from, you find that most people do not understand the whole concept of copyright. Why should you have copyright? Why should you have a right in this creative work? We want to listen to music. They don't understand music in terms of it being a creative work, and in terms being a property which ought to be recognized as such and compensated each and every time it is used. So for most people, if you talk about music, it's something that we listen to in terms of entertainment. It is something that music is just there. So the whole concept of property is very difficult for them to deal with. And I think this determines quite a bit, it goes a long way in determining how we consume, how we access, and how we appreciate music. Then there are issues of codes of conduct again. I was saying, like, if I take an example, when I was growing up, that's the time when we had the dubbing machines, and it was the in thing for you to be able to get as much music as possible. And the interesting thing is that you'd find that most of the music, the pirated music that we used to get in Kenya would come from Pakistan. And more often than not, if you're looking at it in terms of local music, the quality of the cassettes at that particular point from the pirated ones were actually better than the locally manufactured ones. So the tendency was for us to go and buy the pirated copies or to use the pirated copies because the quality was good. It's not like the CDs right now where it doesn't matter where you get it from, but the kind of tapes, and you're getting all these chrome tapes and everything, and the ones coming in from outside. So it did affect the way we consumed the music. And then in terms of technology, and I think we've all spoken about technology. Before then, if I wanted to listen to music, often than not, my parents, basically, they had the vinyl discs and everything, and it was quite cool. You wouldn't dare touch your parents' what was it called, the needle? You dare touch that thing, and basically you'd be signing your death warrant. So you had the vinyl discs and everything. So at that particular point in time, the whole concept of piracy was a bit alien, because you can imagine, if you're looking at the vinyl plants, there were these huge industrial plants. So if you wanted to record or reproduce any music, you'd probably have to invest heavily for you to be able to do that. But as technology went, we got more advanced in technology and everything. We moved into the cassettes, and then the dubbing machines came, and it was much easier for you to deal with it. And at that point in time, we thought we had seen the end of it all. Then the VCDs and the CDs stand up, and then we were thinking, yeah, this is just it when it comes to issues of unauthorized consumption of music. Little did we know that we had something called the internet and the digital technologies coming in. And the curveballs that they have thrown at us are such that most of the time, because as a creative author, through your producers and publishing houses, it was quite easy for you to follow up on your music and deal with it. But now with all these new technologies, the issues of access basically changed. Right now, as I said, if I look at my probably 22-year-old nephew, he doesn't understand the whole concept of having, what is it called? even just having an iPad for purposes of listening to music and everything, he's very comfortable using his telephone. As long as he has internet access, Wi-Fi, he's good to go. In terms of consumption, whether it's reading books or watching movies or watching football or whatever it is, all he needs is a mobile device and excellent internet connection. So technology has changed. Then the next thing we probably need to look into is the issue of the legal framework. How does the legal framework facilitate or otherwise inhibit access to these particular works? And I think that takes us all back to the whole issue of the Copyright Act. What is the purpose of the copyright laws? And I think at this particular point in time, you find that it's basically, the basic premise is to ensure that the creative authors or the rights holders have control of their works. They're able to prohibit or allow the exclusive use of their works. And more often than not, this is something that I think when it comes to the digital technology, the issue of the rights holders and the issues of access by the users basically come into play. And more often than not, I think we rely on issues of exceptions and limitations. Lionel today spoke about the quotation, and you know, when you're looking at it in the context of music, it's very interesting. I'd never thought of it in that context, in terms of the depth that he went into. So the question is, do the laws facilitate or do they allow us to deal with these particular issues of access? Then the other thing that we look into, and I think probably it was also very good to listen to Tonya today, it's the whole issue of the interface between copyright and ICT. Because I think right now we cannot work in isolation, because for a very long time when you talked about copyright, we'd always just deal with issues of copyright. But there are quite a number of ICT issues that they come up, and we have to look at the intersection between these particular ones to see how we can be able to either facilitate the copyright owners or to ensure that we do have access, and at the same time, ensure that the rights holders get what is just in terms of their creativity. And as you go on and looking into issues of law, you find that quite a number of issues in terms of ICT would either be found in the cybercrimes laws or the electronic transactions laws. And now that brings about the issue of compliance. Yes, we all have excellent legal systems and everything, but what exactly happens? Just to give you an example, where I come from, this is basically how piracy is viewed. When you're talking about music piracy, this is actually, an online ad that has been put out by the Kenya Copyright Board to try and sensitize people. So you sit down and you think, if I was to give this to if I put it out to the people who consume music online, is this enough to deter? Is it enough to deal with it? Because most people will look at it and they say, it's okay, yeah, what exactly are you talking about? So this is the approach that we're using, and it takes us back to the whole issue of the societal attitudes. What are our attitudes towards music? How do we deal with issues of compliance? And I think it takes us all the way back to the use of, the different systems that we can use for us to be able to achieve this particular balance. I've spoken about technology. So basically, when you're looking at technology, that brief history that we look from the vinyl tapes all the way down to the digital technologies, you find that it facilitates the copying and distribution of the music. And with the increased internet penetration, it makes things so much easier. So you do not have to go through the cumbersome process of storage and doing all those things. You can actually be able to deal with it. And the technology, frankly speaking now and 20 years ago, has become very affordable. I'm thinking at the time when we were using what were they called, the ADSL lines for the plug-in computer modems and stuff like that, and how long it would take. I think when I was doing my master's, probably about 18 years ago, you find that it used to take almost a day for you to download a movie. You'd plug it in, and then you'd have the download manager. In fact, I think that's the time when Windows and all these people came up with the download managers and all. And you'd go away, come back, go and visit friends, and then you come 50% download. So now that has changed. You download everything in real time. So it makes access to the works that we're dealing with, and these heavy media files that we're dealing with, very easy for us to be able to deal with. And you see, again, in terms of storage, I was just thinking, when I was sending my presentation to Lina basically I had to get my sister, who's an IT guru, to help me deal with the, compress the files and deal with them so that they could be able to access the files. Otherwise, if I was the one doing it, it would be one of those files that you try to send up by the internet and you're told, sorry, it's too big. So, I mean, that helps because now we have all these compression technologies and everything, so I do not need to have a storage device. All I need to do is to be able to stream this particular work. And then, again, as you think you've reached the last page of the internet, you have more things coming up. You have the mobile applications, which help you to download the music. And this is something that is used a lot in my country. Now, in terms of, just to give you a general idea in terms of why the internet has become, very crucial, or it's the focal point when you're talking about distribution, access, and how all these different uses of music. I'm not too sure whether these figures are big enough, but this is as per 2016. The total internet users in Kenya were basically 37 million out of a total population of probably around 45 million at that particular point in time. But the interesting thing is that you'll notice that over probably 80% of this is through mobile data subscriptions. And one of the reasons why that has been the case is that for a very long time we've had very affordable internet accessibility, and that is through the phone. So it's actually cheaper for you to access it on your phone. Actually, no, it is actually cheaper when you're dealing with the fiber cable and everything, but in terms of accessibility, because I think they're still laying out the cables all over the place, you find that the mobile data subscription is really high. So you find that the population, which 70% of them are below the ages of probably 25, you find that they access everything in terms of music, content, whatever it is that they're dealing with, educational material, they use the mobile technologies. So what does this basically mean? You find that it has paved way for very different forms of distribution. Some may be legitimate, some may not be. It depends on how you look at it. And you find now one of the issues, the one that I've put there, it's one of the platforms, and I think in terms of innovations, when you're looking at mobile applications, you find that quite a number of the countries, including Kenya, this is one of the fastest growing industries, so to speak. So one of the biggest telcos, what they've decided to do was to actually come up with a streaming service known as Songa. So you're able to get the music live or online. And basically it's to capitalize. And one of the things that you're going to look at is you need to know your market for you to be able to know how they want to have their music delivered to them. As I said, some of them are illegal, others, it depends on how you're looking at it. But in most instances, you find that the users, as I said, would prefer not to store their music in their devices, but only need internet access to have the streaming devices. And that is, again, coupled with the penetration of the mobile telephony, as well as the affordable internet. I'm not too sure how far that will go now that we've been slapped with almost 10% tax on mobile phones and everything. So it might slow down the entire trend. So in terms of internet and digital technologies, I'll just give you some of the programs, the applications that they use. That's Apple, Deezer, Pandora, Songa, SoundCloud, Spotify, Tidal, TuneIn. Those are the ones that you'll find that quite a number of people at home would be using. And then how else do they access this music? So you find that at some point you still have the hard copies, but they don't, quite a number, that would probably be for the older generation, anybody who's probably 40 and above. They're the ones who still insist on having physical copies of whatever it is that you need. Then you have all these different sites where they can actually download the music, and these are all basically Kenyan, the Mdundo, and you find that some of them, it would cost as little as probably $1.50, so the equivalent of $1.50 for probably 20 downloads or whatever it is. So it's quite affordable for those who want to use the music, to access the music in a legitimate way. Then I think Jace, basically, I'm sure you're familiar with all this. These are the kind of people whom basically right now are literally taking over. And they do have the online radio mixes. It's not necessarily through an intermediary like YouTube, but they'd basically be having streaming services. So you find that they actually do have the mixes on radio and whatever it is that you're dealing with. And I guess the services that we have probably on YouTube and everything, more often than not, you can create your playlist, either have it as public or private or whatever it is, and people can be able to look at it. To listen to it at that particular point in time. And then just to take you to some very interesting culture that we have at home, our public transport, we have minivans. They're very devilish looking things if you look at them. These are basically about 40-seater vans. They're a cross between buses and minivans. And they're very popular among the young people. And one of the things, as I told you, for the young people, if you want to attract them, if you want them to get to do anything, and if you want them to be able to get into your public transport, you find that they do have Wi-Fi. So most of the public, these particular minivans have Wi-Fi. And if you look closely at the interior, they have screens and things, and you can be able to stream, you can be able to listen to music and stuff like that. So this is something that basically, this is one of the ways that you'd find that they'd be listening to. So you'd have guys inside the public vehicle listening to the music, either they've plugged in their earphones or they've gone access the internet, or they listen to the VJs who and watch the VJs on the multiple screens. Half of the time I don't understand how they do it, because it's normally not one screen playing, it's multiple screens playing different music. So does copyright still have a role to play? And I think it depends on how you look at it. To the extent that you're the rights holder or the creator, yes, you're looking at it because it gives you that particular, It helps you, guard and monetize on your creativity. At the same time, there are those who look at it as an impediment to the growth and development, because they're saying that it's not allowing, maybe the exceptions and limitations are too restrictive, or maybe it's something that we need to look into. So to a certain extent, the laws have been applied to forge compliance, but this has been challenged, especially with the internet access. So you find that many people look at it and they say, with the internet, we need to look at this is a different platform and everything. Works should be accessed easily, and probably copyright with the technological protection measures and everything is causing these problems. So the question is, how do we deal with this? Because more often than not, it seems like technology is always way ahead. When we're looking at the history of copyright, you find that even music, as we stand, quite a number of things were incorporated as the technology comes in. So at the time when they were dealing with the Statute of Anne, I think it was mainly issues of public performances and everything, but at that point in time, they were only interested in the stationers. But now with the technology, what happens? How do we deal? How do we deal with issues of access and control in relation to copyright and the music industries? So the question is, are there alternative forms of accessing music? And I think from the various discussions that we've had since Friday, yes, we do have alternatives. And one of them is to leverage on technology. And there are many ways to do this in terms of probably applying the copy control measures and all those things. But I think one of the best things I had today was the issue of using the blockchain technology. How do we deal with these issues? Because it's an issue. There are people who are monetizing using your work. How is it that we can be able to follow up on that particular use? And I think blockchain technology is something that we can look at. Understanding the trends and the market. And I think this is one of the areas, yes, copyright will still have a role to play, but we need to understand what the market demands and how we can be able to access the music without necessarily having infringement. And you find that, I think, again, in my younger days in the Scandinavian, you'd find that that's before Spotify and all those people, everybody wanted to comply. But the question is, were there legitimate sites? So the question is, have we facilitated the access legitimately? And at the same time, how will the artists monetize? Because, as much as we say that we don't want, some artists just want to be known. Most of the time, yes, they want to be known, but they hope that by becoming famous, after that will be able to make money. How will they make the money? Again, it takes you back to the issue of copyright. And then the change of attitude. We need to appreciate music and the creators and be able to know, to facilitate them. And finally, can we stop the music? Nope. Let the music play. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talks and presentations. I don't so much have one unifying question for all of you, but just I wanted to let you know some things or questions that came into my mind while I was listening to you. Geraldine, you said that you have no interest in copyright.
No.
And I was just wondering, so let's say if an established artist takes your installation that sits over there and puts it in the 20 most established museums in the world under his own name and gets a lot of money for that.
Yeah, that's plagiarism. That's another.
That's
Yeah.
okay for you?
No. But I think I'm trying to respond to that.
Yeah.
I think when we discuss these questions of copyright, we always make these extreme examples and situations like this. Now, that is completely unrealistic. There is not going to come any artist right now, take it to a museum and make a lot of money. That's the reality, because it doesn't work like that.
But it would be okay for you.
No, because let me just finish. I think what you're talking about the question of plagiarism. You're not talking about copyright enforcement or something. That situation you're describing is plagiarism. It's like taking a work, an author work, and sign it as you. It's known as plagiarism. So I actually thought it would be hilarious if that happened, but I don't think it would happen. I wouldn't respond to this like would be okay with you or not, because I think, as I said, we should talk about realistic or like things that happen, not these super hypothetical, examples of like it would be for you to happen something that won't happen. So I don't know. I don't think it's a question I don't think it's a relevant thing to discuss it in that term. That's why.
Interesting.
Other scenario maybe I can.
What would be a more realistic scenario for you that you would not be happy with it when it comes to your own work being copied?
I don't mind my work to be copied. That's the thing. I mean, if a Nazi copied, I would be very mad, for instance, and I would, yeah, no. I mean, for instance, I wouldn't. That would be something I would be very against, too. For instance.
Okay, and Marisella, I just wanted to clarify something you said, because on the one hand, you said on the slide that in Kenya, one of the most common way to listen to music is through apps that download music. And on the other hand, you gave this example of your nephew who said that downloads are not relevant for him any longer. It's just that he needs his wireless connection. He's just streaming. So what is more popular, the download apps or the streaming in Kenya?
I should probably just have clarified that. I mean, the downloads, in terms of downloading and storing it in a particular device, more often than not, it is available, but you find that among the youth, they prefer just to stream. So they're not going to bother storing the music in their devices. So all they need, the first thing any young person does if they come to your house or you go to a restaurant or they go to any public space, the first thing they ask is, where is the Wi-Fi? So as soon as they get the Wi-Fi, then they plug in and then they start streaming whatever it is, because they have the specific sites that they're going to visit and deal with them. The older generation, the ones who are not too old, the ones who are attached to the physical copies, are the ones who probably you'll find them doing the downloads. And in terms of probably the issue of unauthorized commercial use, you'll find that in areas where people might not be having, as much as we have very high internet penetration, you find that there's some places whereby now the DJ mixes and everything, they're done. And then someone actually downloads them, and then they sell them out on flash disks or something like that, so they can be able to go and plug them into whatever device they want to go and deal with. But among the young population, most of the, I don't know which generation this one is, X, Y, Z, we passed all of them. It's the one, I think we're moving into the beta and all those things, yeah? Alpha and all that. So they actually do just prefer to do the streaming as opposed to the actual downloads.
So one of the things that I found interesting, what you said, is that you gave this list of some of the services that were most popular in Kenya for people to use to listen and to consume music. And in the past decades, there have been different patterns of consumption in the Western world and in the African world, where, for example, in certain regions, piracy was much more common, or this great example of what you gave is that the pirate copy is actually the better quality copy. But it seems to me that if these are the most popular areas of how people listen to music, these are all legal services, and they are the same services, except for the one Songa, that are run by American or European companies.
Yeah, you do have the various services that they have, but that doesn't stop them from dealing with the illegal sites. Because I said one of the things I said is that some of the sites might be legal and some of them might be illegal. I didn't have time to show you examples of the
So illegal streaming sites.
Yes, you know, like probably they'd go to a site whereby they're offering free downloads of music. There's no compensation to the artists and everything. And more often than not, you find that one day that particular site is there. After a certain period of time, it's been removed, you know. And so they do have instances, quite a number of instances. And I think the Copyright Office, when they're dealing with that thing of piracy kills, those are some of the issues that they're trying to address, because there's quite a bit of illegal downloads. And then there are those who would probably, how do you put it, that bypass, not the VPNs, but they'd actually hack into the legitimate websites, get an unauthorized entry, and then download, and then probably stream to other people or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you have any insight? Because I've just been told that, but I'm not sure if this is actually true, that for companies such as Apple or in other countries, maybe Spotify, that the kind of deals that they are offering to record labels of contemporary African music, that the deals are actually worse than that for other European or American record labels, just because the bargaining power is so much higher, and that actually the deals that you're signing with them are worse for African artists.
Oh, I haven't had the opportunity of looking at at those specific deals and do a comparative analysis to see whether they're better off or worse off. But
are they getting paid?
They are, like I know, okay, if I'm not these particular sites, but for instance with Google, they do get into agreements with the collective management organizations for them to be able to deal with. But they've just signed with a couple of them. Probably, I think I can name a few countries, probably Kenya, Malawi, Nigeria, Ghana. They're very specific. I mean, there are very few countries. Out of the 54 countries that we have, you can actually count the number that they've finalized the deals. But also that depends on the setup that they have in terms of either the organizations within which they can sign with. So quite a number of those countries are still setting up this particular organization. So it's very difficult for them to be able to engage directly with them.
Okay. And Jace, I really liked this thought that you were mentioning of that there is kind of no conversation any longer with new technology when it comes to maybe inappropriate or illegal use of music. So this is something, when you have something like the blockchain technology, it's very much of a, it seems like a yes or no. Or I've also had like lots of friends who were trying to upload their own unreleased music on SoundCloud, and they just got a notice, not possible, because it's music that they are being told is already there, where it's just 100% original music, but there's no way of communication to do anything against this. And I was reminded, maybe 25, 30 years ago, I went with a musician who was a friend to a local flea market in Berlin, where you had vendors of vinyl bootlegs, mostly live recordings. And this friend who was a musician, he found his own record in the bootleg cellar. So at first he was upset, but then he said, and he wanted to shut the vendor down or so, but then he said, okay, if you give me a copy of that record so that I can have my own recording of this copy, then that's okay for me. So it was a kind of transactional, as you said, a conversation that today doesn't seem possible any longer. So thank you for that observation. And then something I don't know, but when you were speaking about the Quran and the changes in the performance, there was a famous case 2 years ago of a Berlin techno music who was ignorant enough to come and play in a club in Tunisia, and he played a song because he wanted to maybe add some, I don't know, maybe he even did it because he thought that it's a nice way to do. He wanted to play some local music, so he played a Quran delivery on top of his techno set. And what happened is that he's not allowed to enter the country any longer. The club was shut down, and the person who owns the club was put in prison. Do you know if there is any combination between Quran performance and contemporary music?
Oh, I mean, yeah, it's so interesting because, I didn't maybe make it explicit in my talk, but all these very quote-unquote musical performances, it's strictly not considered music. And this is why you can be like a hardline Saudi conservative and still listen to people singing the Quran all day because they're not singing, it's
not
worship.
Considered singing.
Yeah, it's recital. But then the thing that's so interesting there is because this style, it's so widespread all over the world, it involves all of these musical scales, musical techniques, like melisma, the way people draw on syllables. So it's entered into the shadow of Quranic recitation is all over popular music, in the Arab world, beyond the Arab world. Very, very, very present. But then of course you get instances like the DJ who's like, this is music. And then you're like, well, actually not. You're completely ignoring the context, and it's incredibly disrespectful. And in your example, the European who goes to Tunisia, he gets to leave the country, but then the guy who's the poor Tunisian who's trying to run a club and bring interesting music is now in jail, and you're like, oh.
And Geraldine, one of the other things you were saying is that, am I right that you lost interest, or you think that for you, copy cultures are not any longer of interest?
Yeah, I mean, I think historically, if we look back, there is like a incredible history now we have in about copy culture. But for me, since 10 years ago, and also because I was very involved working with this and researching this and, in kind of movements like against ACTA and really, really against all these intellectual property agencies, like governmental agencies in Mexico, and kind of tracking the kind of corruption relations between government and collection agencies and stuff. I got also burnout, and because it was like a lot of things that I was like, okay, this doesn't make sense. But today I lost interest because I just think there's a lot of I'm not interested in streaming, that part I think copy culture, for instance, in the internet, from downloading from SoulSeek or, torrents and stuff that had some kind of cool practice, it's all collapsed now into streaming, into content, into this thing that, or even Spotify, and that was something I wanted to ask you, because Spotify doesn't storage the music. They have these pipelines, there are lots of services to which you send your track, and they kind of clear it, they analyze and say, okay, this is good for Spotify. And then Spotify gets all the music from these storages. So they couldn't hack into Spotify and get the legitimate files because they are not stored there, So it creates, everyone is in a way also, Spotify doesn't storage their files neither. It's always someone else that has the file. And copy cultures for me were interesting when we were connected to your computer and I was downloading from your hard drive, the track. So that part, that changed a lot now, that's why I'm not interested in this new kind of streaming culture, because I don't see that it enables the same kind of social relations. That's why I lost my interest in, I think streaming makes everything very flat,
Yeah, and I would add to that. I mean, I agree, and it makes everything flat, and it's centralized in this way, which is incredibly depressing. And then that to me also brings up the ideas about like a blockchain-based solution. You know, that's a technology which is often talked about in terms of decentralization, but for any sort of database like that to work, it needs to be hugely centralized. And then it just comes back to the question of like, oh, do you trust like the Kenyan musical blockchain, or does like the European musical blockchain like force it? Then all these, you just see a situation coming where everyone's going to be suspicious of the other countries or corporations' crypto, and it's just, yeah. So the more centralization is not the answer if we're thinking about travel and creativity.
And there is another thing that it came out when we were talking. I think you mentioned like a little bit like how law enables or not, you know, access and stuff. And for instance, this other piece we make that is a sound piece is about NAFTA and the World Wide Web, because for instance, the web didn't enter NAFTA when it started 25 years ago. They had like this intellectual property kind of clause in these treaties, but the web didn't enter because it was like new technology, like it was a blockchain, no? It was the same kind of like imaginary. So it didn't enter, and now in this new NAFTA, now that everything went down and stuff, now the internet is in the new NAFTA treaty with the US and stuff. So, I mean, we were discussing before how, in a way, NAFTA, you know, opened the gates, you know, to the web to actually have an impact in places like Mexico. You know, because it was not touched by legal treaties and stuff. But now that is now they have this, now that is included in the treaty, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. You know, now it's like a dead end kind of thing, you know, now everything is so centralized and stuff. But for instance, the blockchain is not in the new NAFTA. Or like, you know, crypto is not into the new NAFTA, so it would be interesting to see what happens, although blockchain is like a super centralized surveillance protocol, you know, to track with transparency, but transparency of what, you know?
But I beg to differ. I don't think the blockchain technology is centralized. And I think that's the beauty of it when you're looking at it in terms of monetization and monitoring and getting things, I mean, the artists paid for it, because it's actually decentralized.
But what do you mean with decentralized?
It's not, you know, whether you're looking at it, it's like it's in one particular wherever. I mean, it gives the opportunity for the creative authors to be able to track the use of their music from wherever it is that they are.
Yeah, but that happens also with an Excel file that you put up, like in a Google Doc Excel file. Everyone is if it's open, everyone is free to access that Google Excel file.
But I think this is where we probably need to delve deeper into the issues of blockchain, because I think there's more to it than what we're looking at. So I think it's something that we need to explore. The same way you say that the issue of the internet and everything was not considered 25 years ago because it wasn't an issue. We're not trading, we're not using, you know, all these issues of electronic commerce and everything were not there. But then come 25 years, 25 years later, it becomes an essential part of what it is that we're doing. So it would be good for us to explore further how the blockchain technology works, how these different cryptocurrencies work, and how they can enable the artists to be able to monitor. Because as it stands right now, it's with all these new technologies coming up, as I said before I finished my presentation, technology moves faster than the law.
Yeah.
And then the law, it's later now we sit down and we think, is the copyright law at the moment enough? Do we need to go beyond the copyright law and look at other legal mechanisms within which we can actually deal with the issue of protecting and ensuring access to these particular works, and at the same time ensuring that the artists or the rights holders get something out of it?
But this is exactly the same kind of thing we were saying 10 years ago, but instead of mentioning the blockchain, people were like, oh, but now we have sites like Spotify, and with Spotify, all artists will be allowed, before the blockchain, we were discussing about streaming as a solution to this, right? Like 10 years ago when ACTA was the issue, that was kind of the solution was streaming, like Spotify. now it didn't work, and now the solution might be the blockchain.
It didn't work for whom?
Yeah.
Well, Spotify, it doesn't really work for artists. I mean, it worked for big record companies or like big...
This is not true.
I'd beg to differ, because in my country, you can actually identify the artists who've been able to make money through Spotify. So they've been paid. So it's not true to say that it hasn't worked. The streaming services, I think what the law has
It is
done...
not, when I said it doesn't work, I mean it's not fair.
Oh, okay, that's
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. Sorry, I was, yeah.
That's completely different.
Yeah, it's not fair.
Okay, but I don't. Just explain to me, why is blockchain not fair to the artists?
Oh, no, I mean, with blockchain, I think that what I was trying to say is that we are using the imaginary of blockchain in the same way the streaming imaginary was used to, in the sense that blockchain is decentralized because every copy of the ledger, a lot of people can have it. But the person that controls the blockchain is one person is going to be. It's just a technical form of or I don't know how to say it, that you can have the copy. But it doesn't mean that it's decentralized in the sense that a bank will own its blockchain, a collection agency will own its blockchain, Kenya or like Mexico, they will have their own blockchains.
Yes.
No, that is completely wrong.
In
Nope.
I teach blockchain in the law. I spend a lot of time, and I don't want anybody to leave here thinking that's accurate. But just talk about what you know, but that's completely inaccurate.
Oh, okay. I do not think blockchain is a decentralized technology because of what I am saying. Because just having a
It's
copy of
fully
it.
distributed, and the way that you describe it.
But
in
what do you
terms of
mean fully distributed?
You'd have to. I could spend 14 weeks doing this.
No, because for
But
me,
when
yeah.
you say that it's centralized, there is a difference between a public permissionless blockchain and some of the things you're talking about, which may be consortium or private, that a bank may use. It's completely inaccurate to say that blockchain technology for the original chain of Bitcoin is, not only is it decentralized, it's fully distributed. And if I take out one node in Nigeria, the system still runs. It also is based on what we call lex cryptographia, which is the law of the code that's fully open, that can be vetted, and the Bitcoin
That for me
blockchain's been around.
doesn't, yeah.
But
I
You're
understand.
contrarian and you're against
No,
the man and all.
I just don't think that
I'm not here to convince you.
No, but I just don't think that make it
I'm a
decentralized.
scholar in the area. I spent a lot of time. I just participated in a WIPO presentation where I trained lawyers there.
try.
So you can't let people go
Well,
without knowing and being
I'm going to have a
expert in the area.
shot now too,
Yeah,
because
but-
I do
yeah.
think, I said it's centralized insofar as if there's going to be any organization, consortianism mechanism to get musicians money that uses the blockchain, people need to know. Actually, I would like to keep speaking if that's okay. So if that's going to be, I can't simply go and say, I'm Taylor Swift. I mean, I know I'm Taylor Swift, but this so-called reality disagrees with me. And so when I say it's centralized, it's like there needs to be an authority that verifies identities, that verifies the claims being made, that lets certain claims pass into it as truth and pass into it as not truth. And yes, the information's decentralized, it can be everywhere, but all that stuff, especially if we're talking about payment, especially if we're talking about contribution of individuals, that is what brings back this whole level of social interaction, regulation, communication, and the technology, this sort of, yes, a great decentralized, cryptographically insured thing, it's great, but if I say I'm Taylor Swift, that's not going to fly, whether or not. And so in terms of like a blockchain that would actually give money to musicians, that has to be centralized. It has to be controlled by
I think the decentralization thing is like a good rhetoric that, maybe in the technical form of the code, it is decentralized. Yeah, I know you make that. But for us, that we also have been involved for a while, and we have all the...
Who don't fully appreciate the difference between a consortium mechanism like that, blockchain.
But can I finish?
When I did my presentation and distinguishing between a permission consortium,
Yeah,
which has some level of, that's not a public.
But you're talking about your presentation. Now we're in our presentation. Yeah. But let me finish. I think decentralization and this rhetoric of decentralization is precisely for me, and I don't think I'm wrong on that. It's just what I've been seeing from my perspective, is that it can create this illusion that a decentralized technology has nothing to do with property. When blockchain is a technology that can be used completely to do this intellectual property model in which you will know the provenance of things, in which you know who copied what, if you know that person, what copy then to whom will go the money, that for some people that is invested in blockchain might be fantastic. I think it's a nightmare. That's it.
See,
and I think it's completely valid for a scholar like you and for an artist like me that also research and pay attention to those kinds of questions.
I think for me, when I raised the issue of blockchain technology, it was very simple. We are looking at the utilization, commercialization, and what do you call it, basically the reward that you're going to give the artist. And I'm saying that we have all these systems that are in place. We have moved into the world whereby we have the music being used practically everywhere and anywhere. Now the question is, blockchain, as it stands right now, it is one of those technologies that I believe we can actually use for the artists to be able to get their money, because it offers a more precise, like you can actually, either it could be part of the music, because you see, like nowadays, we are not dealing with everything. It could be part of that particular music. So if you're dealing with issues of sampling or whatever it is, you would be able to track and get money from it. So it's an issue of how do we facilitate, my angle was I'm looking at it, how do we facilitate access, but at the same time, we allow for the artists to be able to get money out of that particular access. So that's basically what I was. And yes, if it's the collection agency that's going to do it, that's fine, because they've been working and dealing with it. That's fine. It depends on where you come from. I think for quite a number of countries, they have issues with their collective management organizations, and that is something they need to address as collective management organizations. There are countries where the collective management organizations work seamlessly, and they're able to help facilitate the artists get this particular music. So I don't think we should mix the issues in terms of governance and organizational issues in whatever country, but we're looking at it holistically. How is it that we can facilitate? I mean, that was my angle when I introduced blockchain as one of the technological issues that we can actually use to address the issues of how to access and remunerate the artists.
Marisella, thank you very much. One observation, and I'm switching topics here before maybe we have time for one or two questions from the audience. But Jace, I also really liked your observation that for you as a DJ, the DJ mixes have become less visible in the way, because how it changes through platforms such as SoundCloud or on Spotify at the moment, it's not even possible to host DJ mixes or upload them. But then I also liked what you said, Marisella, that at the same time I really like this photo you showed of the public transport buses, and where you can listen to maybe mixes again, so that maybe other things are opening up while they are closing down in other parts. So I found this an interesting.
And for me, that touches on, like, I was definitely talking about the sort of the internet-based visibility and the internet as some sort of archive, and my dissatisfaction as a commercial archive and not the sort of open library. But yes, whether it's piracy or official, there's this idea of that, between the internet and being in the room, there's a million different ways, from Bluetooth, short-range transfers, to you're taking the microbus, to there's all these instances where music does what it naturally does, which is sort of speed up and accelerate and mix and take in ideas and function in this way, which is very much antithetical to notions of copyright. It's you're in the bus, you've got 6 DJ mixes at once, and that's the sonic experience you're dealing with, and it's fantastic. And so there's always, this interplay between sort of technology and any sort of means to track exactly what's happening, where musical culture gets formed and gains meaning.
Okay, thank you. So does anyone in the audience have any questions? Yes, I see some hands. Maybe, okay.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to just sort of ask a general question. I've been here for the whole conference and everything, and now that we're sort of talking about streaming, I'm sort of looking at the back end of streaming, the data science angle, where basically musicians, artists are becoming algorithms that at the centralized server level, if you do have technologies like blockchain, or you have other mechanisms by which, just like the sort of way we went from, say, owning like Adobe Photoshop, the program, and basically paying for a license to get maintenance and updates. We now pay a subscription, you know, and so like the data is tracked at every level. They know, like, you know, and as soon as you stop paying your subscription, you lose access to the files. I'm sort of wondering that, like, for instance, here in Germany, Native Instruments is coming out with the new version of Tractor, and Tractor will allow for streaming with SoundCloud, like the way DJ Pro had done this last year with Spotify, correct? So I'm just really looking at the back end in terms of, like, when we talk about copyright, if you go upstream from the level of worrying about, like, who's stealing from who, and we start to look at these, like, huge corporations with centralized data, and now that they can see our algorithm, they can see the use in real time, are we sort of working towards a future where copyright begins to look like the individual, or is copyright sort of like maybe what some musicians and artists would say is style, you know, but like at a certain level, I can imagine that there's enough information, say on myself or on like someone on the panel, where like a company knows like not just what you do, but how you do it, right? And so like maybe the nuance moving from the compositional score as what can be copyrighted, the melody, to like literally a new version of a nuance to where this is what becomes the originality, this is what becomes the thing that carries the value, as opposed to just having, you know, a sort of broad idea of, you know, commercialized information. So I don't know if that's sort of a too big a question, or, but just the idea I'm thinking about is like, can copyright be seen as a algorithm that can be malleable in a sort of value-based way moving forward into the future, if I could ask that as well, like what your thoughts might be.
I mean, just very fast, I have just a few thoughts related to that, I will just go very fast. Like, I think the problem with this Spotify and, you know, these pipelines that feed them and already kind of pre-approved, I think they're making kind of creating this very clean culture that someone decides through algorithms and stuff, what is music, what is a note, what qualifies as a track, what is a sample, and that's certainly a super centralized decision by people that has the money to produce, you know, these systems to do that. That goes from databases, I don't know, these pipelines, blockchains, I mean, those things are not, you know. So I think that all these technologies, all these like surveillance technologies, all these like things, tracking things, that's what they do. Now they clean out culture and they give us this pristine kind of thing of what they do, we think we should consume, which can be very decentralized technically, but it sucks and is like very centralized attitude to culture. And the other thing, just very fast, like I know a friend of mine that maybe you should check out, he's been studying Spotify, these things of like what is a note, what is being accepted as a track in music, and it's called the Spotify Black Box, and the book comes out like in English in a couple of months by Erasmus Fleischer. And he studied with his research group exactly all these questions. So I think it's going to be like a very important book in these questions of data prospecting what we produce through listening to music.
I would say, it's an interesting question, because at some level, I feel like it's like you're talking about what is style, like what is it to be human in a sense, because Spotify has these massive data sets and they're applying machine learning, but they can only enact that learning on like quantifiable, like machine legible information, on or off, digital, you know? And so I think we are becoming more robotic ourselves, like how many likes did I get? Like the sort of quantitative world is winning. And so in a way, the question seems almost utopian in a sense. It's like, could Spotify reach a point where their server farms are analyzing like quantitative data? I mean, like you know, qualitative, like the essence, the ineffable? And it's probably be a dystopia if that were ever to actually come into being.
And copyright has been always about counting how many plays, who listened to that. It's the same kind of ethos, copyright, and this horrible algorithmic data counting culture have.
Just as a quick thing, I would say, like, just the whole idea is like, can we digitize culture, right? Can we quantify it? Can we? Oh, sorry. Yeah, just to quickly, part two. You know, the whole idea of the physical object is being the copyrightable object. like what happens as we move away from a vinyl, from a tape, analog, cassette, from a mechanical, physical thing to something that becomes more intellectual property, something streaming. I mean, if I walk by a painting and I briefly look at it, it's is that the same as watching Netflix? Like I don't own the painting, but I've seen it, I've interacted on it, on some interface level, but like, can I then be charged for that because I glanced in the direction of, what is somebody else's property? So I'm just trying to understand again, like where we might go in the future away from this conference and just like as a thought experiment, if we had the nuance to do quantum computing to understand like, could this be a possibility that copyright might move to beyond the gesture of a swipe or a like or something to where your actual, data sets that you're giving to these companies qualify you to receive, monies because they are your fingerprint in the way that we fingerprint a sample or a break.
Okay, probably I won't belabor that point, but I was just thinking, the way you're looking at all those things, it's the way, it's like the way of doing the business, not so much the copyright itself, because the basic tenets and principles of copyright still remain. So the question in terms of whether the sieving is being done by a machine or a human being, the bottom line is that work copyright protected? So I think the basic nuances in terms of copyright still remain. So now here it's the issue of transmission, ownership, and such like things that probably we'll be seeking to address. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're getting something, like one of the reasons I wanted to put together DJing and the chronic recitation is because these are two instances where the sort of quote unquote artist, like they're not claiming ownership over it. So like they themselves, at the core of their practice, they're sort of already proposing an alternative to copyright. That was a great point.
Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. Maybe you can ask them in private after this conversation, but we are done here for this evening regarding the talks, but there will be music coming on shortly, and I just wanted to thank each of you for coming here and traveling all the way to be here with us, and thank you also for having such patience and spending our time with us.